Ladies and gents, today is a special day at Carrot Corner. It's one of those days on which we give you free stuff. Today's free stuff is a video by none other than 200 Zoom Battler Kruzer, one of my favourite, if not my absolute most favourite coach to watch on Carrot Corner. You may have heard me talking about his series Reg Wars, in which he dissects hands played against other tough regulars. Episode 1 came out at the end of April. Episodes 2 to 4 came out this week, and today on YouTube for free we're giving you episode 1 of Reg Wars so that you can check it out. Someone just said this morning in our Discord group, actually it was last night, they said, watching Kruzer's vids, I'm being forced to contend with how I actually don't know a single thing about poker. And I couldn't agree more. That's actually how I feel when I watch Kruzer. I'm like, holy shit, man, there's so much more to this game than anyone would actually think. To understand how good the content is, you're just going to have to watch it. Let me know what you think about this content. There's another 9 episodes, 3 of which are already out, coming at you if you're a Carrot Corner subscriber over the next few months. Enjoy.
Hey guys, what's up? Kruzer here, and this is episode 1 of the series I'm going to be producing for Carrot Corner called Reg Wars. In today's series, we're going to examine some of my hands that I 3-betted the pre-flop and it went post-flop, and see how well I played, what are my thoughts, how well I should have played, what I think of my villain's play, etc, etc. So, let's jump straight into it. The first hand we have here, we have pocket kings. Button opens, we 3-bet, calls. We get this board, pretty low and dry board. My strategy here would be polarized approach. I'm going to be using big bet or check. My hand will probably bet most of the time. How I would choose what overpair to bet and what to mix check with. It's probably depending on my suits. So when I have a spade, I'm more likely to bet because I unblock some of his King X of clubs, hearts. If I had like heart and diamond, I would be willing to check more. But anyways, I went for a bet. Billy calls. So we get a ace on the turn. Usually when you get ace after you see better the flop, you want to do a lot of small betting because on most of the boards, ace will hit you most of the time because of your ace queens, ace kings, ace jacks, whatever. But on this specific board, it's not really the case because the board is so low. We'll have to defend so many backdoor ace x, so many overcard ace x on the flop that the ace also hits him. So we have to have a checking range as well on the turn, which I do go for. And we face a stab. Our range in this spot is all the overpairs, 9x, and a lot of our ace-x that we see better the flop with. So against the stab, I think we need to call 1 with our overpairs. Some of them are better than rest. Like let's say if I had queens here, that would be a better call, even though kings is a better hand in showdown strength, right? Because it's a bigger overpair. But with queens, you also block the villain's main value, which is ace-queen. So if I do want to fold some overpairs, I would rather fold jacks, 10s over queens and kings, right? So we go with a call. And we get a pretty brick on the river. He's not really going to be having 10s in this line because 10s is too strong in these configurations to start bluffing the turn already. He might have some ace 10s, but that's like one combo of ace 10 of diamonds. And now his range is going to be ace queen off, ace jack suited, pocket 9s, pocket deuces, pocket 3s for value. Depends how wide he calls pre-flop. Some people fold them pure, these lower pocket pairs. Some people call them a lot. This is also one of the decisions that I make in game at the end of my thought process. Like I always wonder how many value does he rep based on his stats. So let's say he folds appropriate amount, which is like around 60% button versus small blind. Then he wouldn't have those deuces and 3s. But if he likes to play post-flop, he would have them at full frequency. And this guy had decent fold to 3-bet, so I wouldn't expect him to have those sets that often. So most of his ranges, his best hands are 9s, ace-queen, ace-9, ace-10, ace-jack. And then he has the bluffs. So what are the bluffs in this spot? They're mostly going to be coming from low pocket pairs. So that's 4s, 5s, 6s, maybe 7s, some backdoor overcards, which are a good barrel on the turn, but they always have to give up on the river, in theory at least. Because once you arrive to the river with those hands, let's say he has king jack of hearts, queen jack of clubs, etc., those are pretty bad bluffs on the river because he blocks my folding range. Like most of my folding range of the river will be those overpairs that I call the turn, and now I have to fold the river. So his best bluffs are pocket pairs in this scenario. So I check, he jams, and now I have a decision. I have to think about my range here. So I have so many ace-x here that I can call, and that's pretty much probably enough. Maybe I can mix call with queens, exactly because I block ace-queen. But most of my other overpairs are probably going to be easy folds at this point. But then again, this guy is pretty aggro, and as I said, he really needs to understand the spot to not overbluff this node. With those queen jacks, king tens, with flop backdoors, and also all the low pocket pairs, etc, etc. So if he bluffs all of those hands, our hand isn't really a fold anymore. He isn't really 0 EV, a mix. It becomes a pure call. If he overbluffs this node, which I have stats on him, he's pretty aggro. I expect him to overbluff as hell. And also, one of the reasons I called is because of my king of spades. If he is going to bluff those backdoor stuff, it's way better to have king of spades because I unblock the bluffs like hearts and clubs. So I go for a call. It is an overcall from my perspective, but I thought he would also overbluff. So that's why I did it in the end. And he had a pretty good played pocket sixes, which is a standard bluff, I believe, in these spots. So yeah, that was the king's hand. All right, next hand. I have king 10 of spades in the small blind. We decided to squeeze. Both regs called. This is one of the best boards for us in this spot. So I go for a range C bet small. Reg 1 calls and reg 2 folds. And we get a... Let's talk about his range here. So I don't expect him to have any raises. He has to have, again, depends how wide he calls. It all comes down to every decision post-flop, on the flop, turn, or river. It all comes down to how tight the guy is pre-flop, like how many of the combos he's going to have in his range. So I expect him here to have like decent bunch of king jack, ace 10, queen jack, etc. Not so many low pocket pairs because after all, this is not a normal 3-bet pot, it's a squeeze pot, but I decided to include it because it's familiar. So I don't expect that many pocket pairs, but I expect the Broadway region to be a lot of them. Some of them he will 4-bet and some of the hands he will call. So we get this turn, which is a pretty equity shifting card, I believe, because like if we had aces here, ace king, our hand becomes pretty bad at this point because we lose to a lot of straights and 2-pair. So in game, I simplified to range check because of that region that we're going to have a lot of 1-pair hands here. Even though it's probably, solver probably has a betting range here, I simplified these 3 straight turns into a range check in a 3-bet pot once I see bet the flop. So I go for a range check and he decides to sub half pot. So our hand is an easy continue here because we have a redraw, right? So he's repping at this point, he's repping those straights, 2-pair, and some of the sets that he didn't 4-bet pre-flop, maybe queens. Queens is a high frequency call from these positions. Maybe against the squeeze, it will be like more of a 4-bet, but still I expect him to have it some of the time. Ace 10 as well, 10-9 as well, some of the time. I think I'm not going to play any raises with my hand here because I just get called by better. The only hands I would raise probably are some of the value that unblock his calls. So let's say 10-9, ace 10. So I get value from his sets and 2-pair, right? And then some combo draws with a diamond and stuff like that. So I went just with a call this time and we get a 4 straight on the river. So again, equity shifting card. We're going to have bunch of 10x in this line. All our jack 10s, queen 10s, king 10s are gonna arrive on the river here. So we have to have a donking range in my eyes. And that's what I go for with my hand. I go for a donk. So the idea of this is once he does have those 2 pairs, but the most part is the sets. So let's say he has queens, he has jacks, maybe 6s as well. If he calls pre, if he's loose pre, all those hands have an easy check back in his shoes. But once I donk, he's put in a tough spot because he doesn't need to be good that often, and I need to have, like, most of my range will be 10x, but I also need to have some bluffs, and for the price he needs to be good 14% of the time. For the price he has to bluff catch those sets that will be an easy check back if I just check back to him. And I see something really unexpected, so he decides to jam versus my donk. I just call, easy call for me, and I see a really aggressively played 7-6 of clubs. So let's give him my thoughts on his hand. The idea for his river shove, it's a really advanced play. It requires both regs to know the spot pretty well. So I think his plays a punt in practice, but let's find the reasons why would it be a good play against a good player. On the river, once I donk here, I'm not only going to have 10x here. Most of my range will be 10x, but I'm going to have also some of the hands that can get 10 value against his worst two pairs and against his worst sets. So what are those hands? Probably aces mostly, and some kings if I won't raise the turn. So aces and kings get value from his queens and jacks and sixes, and two pair if he's stubborn for this small size, where he doesn't need to be good that often. But as I said, it's a really advanced play, and I need to be really studied to bluff this. Let's say what would be my best bluffs in the spot? Probably something like some hand that doesn't block his set calls. So let's say I will have to turn something like ace king into a bluff here at some frequency. Would I do that in game? Probably not, because it's so, like, you need to be focused. You need to be playing like A game, S tier game for this spot. So it's really like deep in the game tree. And it requires both regs to be on the same level, you know. So that's why I think his raise is a punt in this spot. But yeah, it's an interesting and reason why you have to donk the rivers. You get called by worse, and some of the time you will face spews like this, right? So let's go to the next hand. All right, next hand, ace king in the big blind. We 3-bet the cutoff open. We get a nice board. Go for a c-bet. We're going to have a decent c-betting frequency on this 10 high low board, even from the big blind. And it's going to be like around 50%, 70%, somewhere in around that. My heuristic for this spot is I always go for 50 on pair boards because it's harder to defend against. And our hand can check and bet. We get a call and a 9 on the turn. And again, with a heart, maybe we could develop some betting frequency, but our hand will mostly be a check because we dominate a lot of worse ace-x and a lot of backdoor stuff that call us on the flop. So it's mostly going to be a check for me. And we face a small stab on the turn. So what's our range at this spot? All the overpairs and strong 10x will go into a shove most of the time, if not always. So we need to develop some weaker hands to defend. So if we had a low 10x, if we had 9x, those would be good candidates. And then we have a lot of those ace highs, ace king, ace queen that we need to defend in order to not overfold. Because as I said, we still have a lot of showdown value. We beat so many of his backdoors from the flop and worse ace-x. So we go for a call and we get an interesting river. So on this river, as I said, most of my range will be those ace kings, ace queens, while most of his range will be low pocket pairs that are trying to deny equity on the turn, that they're pushing equity against my overcards, and then 10x and stuff. So this river improves me more, and I have to develop a donking range for my ace king specifically, ace queen as well. So in game, I thought this combo will be pretty decent as a bluff catcher because I also block some of the flushes he might have. So I didn't want to donk this hand specifically, but if I had other ace-x, I would probably donk them high frequency, if not pure. And also one point which I included this hand in this video to talk about is the exploit in this hand is this spot will be so, in my eyes, it will be so under bluffed for the imposition to call versus our river donk. So let's say we have decent showdown hand that beats some of his bluffs, but loses to some of his value as well. So let's say we have 9x, we have pocket 8s, and those hands might be a check in solver because it will be over bluff to donk jam them. But I believe once the ace comes on the river and we do donk, people will have really hard time defending 10x, defending pocket jacks, especially pocket jacks in this spot, right? Because with jacks, they block the only bluff I can possibly have, which is queen jack that might play it this way. So he needs to be really dialed in and understand that I have those 9x, that I have 8x in my range to make the bluff catch with his 10x and jacks region, right? He needs to understand the spot really well. It's really easy to, in my eyes, from experience, from what I saw in games, people would mostly fold all of their bluff catchers when the ace comes. As I said, if they're not playing a game, if they're not really dialed in, if they're not thinking about my range. But anyways, with my specific hand, I went for a check and we face a shove. So the opposite part of this ace on the river is, so let's say he's playing a villain that doesn't have a donking strat. Let's say someone else is in my shoes. And then most of my range will be ace kings and ace queens. And then he has to bluff into that range that has ace kings a lot. And then he has to expect me to fold my ace kings for his bluff to be profitable. This is all exploitative talk practice, which I don't think it's logical, to be honest. And that's also one of the reasons why donking is also better, because once you do face a jam, it will also be underbluffed as hell, because he's jamming into a range that has ace king. Again, he has to know that I have those 9x, that I have those 10x. That's the portion of the range that he's trying to target with his bluff. And he also has to be understanding that spot. And it's really easy for villain to see an ace and think, oh, he has ace king, he has ace queen, he will have hard time folding versus my bluffs. And then he checks back, even a most aggressive guy. That's from my experience. So I would think this spot is really, really, really underbluffed. But as I said, I had a plan in game with my specific. If I had other combos, I wouldn't probably have other combos of ace kings because I would be donking them. But with my specific hand against this specific guy, I was hoping he might find some bluffs. If I had, as I said, other combos of ace king, I would be folding exploitatively because it's really underbluffed spot in my eyes. But yeah, I go for a call and you see he has top range. We'll never know what he bluffed is because we didn't catch him with a bluff, but these are my thoughts, and these are some of the thoughts that you can test in your games, in your pools. How do they play? I think this is the most logical way for a human to think, so that's why I included this hand. So there's two key exploits, like you can overbluff on an ace and you have to fold range versus the jam, versus most people, right? But this guy is pretty solid, good regular. And I already had a plan with my specific hand to bluff catch, right? He also might have ace queen off, which I beat. Because also I've noticed that this guy value jams thin, etc, etc. But these are like specific reasons now. What I'm talking about is general population and from my experience, how I see this spot and how it's played out. Let's go for the next hand. So this is one of the cool hands against a really old school regular, I'd say. It's really, really tough to play against. This series isn't just playing against like GTO Regs, GTO robots, like good Regs, right? It's playing against all kinds of Regs that are not necessarily theoretically orientated, but they're really tough to play against because you can't range them most of the time. It's really easy for me, at least, to play against a good theory reg because I know what he's thinking. I know his range because that would be my range as well. So in my database, I have the best results against one of the regs that I think are the best in the pool because we play similar, you know, it's really easy to exploit. It's really easy to beat someone like that. What I have the most trouble is playing against really old school guys with their own style of strategy. And we'll see that style in this hand, right? Okay, so let's go. So we have he flatted pre-flop and we went for a squeeze and he called the squeeze. We get ace deuce 3, which is going to be better for us because we're going to have aces, ace king, ace queen, all the high aces, while he will 3-bet those hands most of the time pre-flop. So we go for a high frequency c-bet and he raises us already on the flop. So what's his range in this point? Again, against someone that's not playing proper pre-flop ranges, it's really hard to range them, as I already said. But it's probably something like good ace, ace queen plus, and then the really, really small portion of his range, low pocket pairs, right? So he isn't really repping much on this board. He needs to be flatting those deuces and threes pre versus a 2.5x open, which is really, really unlikely. Even against old school guy, I wouldn't expect him to have those hands in his range ever. Maybe super low frequency. But anyways, our hand is a pure call. We have a redraw, nothing to talk about here. Diamond completes on the turn, and now again. So he does improve to flushes, but most of the flushes will also 3-bet the preflop. So he's repping really, really, really narrow range. He needs to have like king jack here, king queen, that flat preflop, and then called my squeeze, which doesn't really happen often in practice. Again, if he does have those deuces and threes, we have an easy call on the turn because we can still improve. And we beat his bluffs still. So we get a brick on the river, and he decides to follow through. He decides to jam. At this point, he's repping deuces, threes. He's not repping ace queen anymore. So he's repping deuces, threes, and flushes. And no matter how wide he is pre-flop, I still think that's so small portion of his range that it's really easy to overbluff We get the same pattern with all these hands where I'm showing the hands where it's really easy spots to overbluff if you're not like controlling your frequencies, if you're not constructing your ranges well, etc., etc. So he does go for the jam, and I have a decision now. I do have ace-x diamond flashes that are way better. I do have sets, like it doesn't matter if I have it ace-10 here or ace-king because he's repping either flushes or sets. And with ace-5, there's a really small chance that I even block some value. He might have 5-4 as well. That's also a hand that he would always raise on the flop because it unblocks my calls. It unblocks the ace-x calls, right? You want to build a pot with that. And yeah, that's so, as I said, he's repping really, really narrow range. And in my eyes, it will be overbluffed again, just because the pre-flop range construction. He needs to be flatting deuces and threes pre and then calling a squeeze. Like how wide will that happen? We have to check his stats. But it's easier for him to have, let's say, pocket sixes here, pocket sevens here with a diamond and follow through, than have pocket deuces, threes that call pre-flop and call the squeeze, if you know what I mean. So I go with my gut, I go with my feeling about the spot, and I don't even mix these types of hands against such a small portion of his value range that it's easy to overbluff in my eyes. We go for a call, and this time we do beat our occasional bluff, pocket fours. So if he has pocket fours, he maybe has deuces and threes as well. So we got lucky this time, but this is what I mean. It's really hard to range these players that are playing old school style. They're still winning players, most of them, but they're not that theoretically orientated. Even though this is a really good bluff, in theory, if it was like played properly, you know, if it was played 3-bet pot as he raised, I 3-bet and he called, but he called pre-flop and then he called a squeeze. So I didn't really expect him to have these low pocket pairs, but if he has fours, he also has fives, he also has sixes, he also has sevens, and all of those hands might raise the flop and follow through once they get the turn diamond. So yeah, this is my reasoning why I called ace-5 against this specific guy. Let's go for the next hand. Next hand, we have pocket sevens, we go for a 3-bet, we get call. 10 high board is usually going to be pretty good for the small blind because we're going to have 10x advantage. We're going to have ace-10 off, king-10 off at a mix that the preflop caller will never have. If he has ace-10 off, he will 4-bet it or fold most of the time. And that's why on these boards, we have the highest c-bet frequency and the biggest one. But the paired board, as I said in my previous hand, my heuristic is always go for one smaller sizing than the theory suggests on paired boards because it's harder to defend. So I would use 50% here on a normal one. But since it's paired, I go for a smaller size, and it's not really going to be any EV loss, especially if a guy won't find really unintuitive raises, flop raises, etc., etc. So we go for a c-bet, 5 on the turn. We decide to check. We have to check a lot here because we're going to be c-betting a lot as well ourselves. So naturally, we want to check a lot of turns. And like so, his flushes improve, his pocket sixes, pocket sevens, pocket nines with a heart, you know, they all get equity. So we can't really mindlessly blast our overpairs on this turn. So we go for a check this time with pocket sevens with a heart. We face a small stab. I think the only decision here is just call. If we would have overpair with a heart, if we would have 10x, those are the hands that want to build a pot and want to play for stacks, but this one is always going to be just a call. And we get a brick on the river, we check, he jams, and we have a decision here. So, as I said, most of the overpairs and 10x will jam the turn versus his stab. So we need to find some of these low pair calls on the river. And now we look at his response. I see bet as really small on the flop. That means he's going to be even wider than usual. So all the backdoor diamond hands, Jack-9 suited, 7-6 suited, Ace-Jack off with a heart, King-Queen off with a heart, Ace-Queen off with a heart, a lot of possible bluffs, but also a lot of value. He's going to have a lot of flushes, small blind versus button. He's going to have a bunch of 10x as well, 10-9, Jack-10, King-10, Ace-10, pocket 8s, pocket 5s, a lot of value as well, but also, as I said, a lot of bluffs as well. Now we have to think, does our hand block the bluffs or it blocks value? Our hand is pretty neutral at this point. It blocks some of the value, 7x of hearts, but the key part is it doesn't block any single bluff. So all the overcards with a heart, it doesn't block that. It doesn't block Jack-9 suited. It doesn't block Queen-Jack suited. Based on that, it's going to be a decent bluff catcher in game. So I decided to call this time, and he had 10x, and we lost the stack. But let's check this hand in the wizard to see what's his river range. What is he supposed to give up? What is he supposed to follow through to make our sevens a good call, to make our sevens a bad call? Let's see what would happen, what I think would happen in practice. As you can see here, we have to check a lot on this card. Go for a check. Tabs. Our range here will be raising 10x, we'll be raising over pairs with a heart. As I said, some bluffs, over cards with a heart. You know, they have decent equity versus his low pocket pairs that he has to stab, and then he will have a hard time calling a raise, calling a shove, whatever our strat is on the turn. Anyways, we went for a call, and we had a 4 river. We check, he jams, and our hand is a call with a heart, but it's close to indifferent already. It's 0 EV in the practice, a little above 0 EV. Well, what I like to do now is when I study, I always check the villain's response. So what's his value in this spot? So he's going to have quads, full house, flush, straight, okay. Trips, a lot. A lot of his range, you see here, is going to be value. So let's say by 30%, more than 30% of his range. There's also some teen jams here that will probably never happen in practice. So like pocket jacks, pocket nines, we can check that. We can lock that already. And now we have the bluffs. So let's see the bluffs. Ace jack suited, ace 9 suited. Maybe these ones aren't so easy to find in game because they have to call the flop versus my small flop stab, right? But these ones are easier. So backdoor diamonds. He has to be giving up some of the backdoor diamonds. He has to be following through queen jack, which I expect people would. And this is one of the things I wanted to talk about. Ace queen, ace jack with a heart. You can see they're giving up most of the time. Our hand is already 0 EV. It's indifferent. Let's say I had pocket sevens without a heart. That was a fold, right? So let's imagine I have that hand. And we can see here that ace queen with a heart, ace jack with a heart are mostly giving up. They have to give up. King queen of diamonds has to give up. Ace 7 of diamonds, ace 9 of diamonds have to give up. So what I would do now, if I would be starting my hand, is I would think most of these hands, like let's say ace 7 would follow through. Let's say king queen. I don't want to give full optimistic approach, so sometimes I also check some of these hands. But the easiest hands to follow through are the ace jack soft, right? Because with a heart they block my calls. Ace queen, if he decided to bet the turn, probably always follows through with a heart, with ace of hearts specifically. And then we can even remove some of the non-intuitive combos, like ace 9 with spade and club. I don't think people would float that wide pre or bet the turn. So let's remove this hand. So again, it's not full optimistic approach, so we don't want to be biased when we're looking at the response. We see all the queen nines that I haven't mentioned. Pre-flop also, bluffing, jack nines, I mentioned that. Queen jacks, I mentioned that, right? So let's put queen jacks as well, pure. King queen, we can see here already some of the king queens giving up. So let's see our response versus this strat. Button jams, and now even the sevens, as I said, without a heart became from 0 EV to 9 big blind EV call. So again, it's all about knowing the solution in theory, knowing where you are at your range to not be over calling or under calling. But then again, at the end, you have to think about the villain, you have to think about practice from your experience, how the spot plays out. You're always checking the solver, have you played correctly or not, you know. A bad way to study would be you see his jam and then you see your hand is a mix with a heart and fold without a heart, right? Like you taught in game. But the good way is always to check villain's response and always to check like how intuitive these bluffs are. These king queen offs, ace queen offs, ace jacks off. We saw that one of the best bluffs have to give up because they block the main folds, right? If I had ace queen off, ace king off, I'm going to be folding that most of the time on the river. And that's one of the reasons why these hands give up. But as I said, having a heart on a flush board, it's really, really easy to overbluff. Queen jack as well, like who would give up queen jack? Jack 9. Okay, these are give ups like king queen, king jack. I won't even bluff that on the turn. I know solver bluffs them because it's clairvoyant and then whatever, like it has to have bluffs on every run out. But these hands I would never bet on the turn and never bet on the river. That's so that I didn't even no lock them. So we don't have like full over bluff, you know. But with the hearts, I think it's realistic. And this is why our hand is not even a bluff catcher. It becomes 9 big blinds, 11 big blinds plus EV call. even though this time we ran into the top range. But this is why I believe the hand is well played, that it's a good call. All right, so that was all for this first episode, guys. I'll be making new episodes with different teams next time. Maybe also some more 3-bet pots, because these are the most common ones where you're playing for stacks. But also maybe some single race pots where I bluff catched, where I bluffed myself for stacks as well. And yeah, hope you enjoyed it and stay tuned for more episodes. See you guys.